Hello and welcome to Daily Devotional. Today I want to talk to you about three common women mentioned in the Old Testament who left behind an uncommon legacy that extended all the way into the New Testament. First up, we'll take you to the city of Jericho. The city of Jericho was a strong fortress requiring stealth and subterfuge for the armies of Israel to conquer and thus gain the promised land of Canaan. A group of Israelite spies entered Jericho to scout out the fortifications. They entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab. The king of Jericho found out about these spies and sent word to Rahab to hand them over to him. Instead, Rahab hid them until the coast was clear. She confessed to the Israelite spies that she had heard of the triumph of their God and told them, "The Lord your God is indeed the God of heaven above and on earth below." She then helped them escape over the wall. When the Israelite army appeared before the city, the walls of Jericho came crashing down. All the inhabitants of the city were put to death except Rahab and her family, out of gratefulness for her saving the Israelite spies. Rahab and her family lived in Israel from then on out. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Rahab married one of Abraham's descendants and was the mother of Boaz in the story of Ruth. Next, we come to Ruth, the foreigner. Among the more inspiring books of the Bible is the book of Ruth. It's the story of a woman of Moab whose mother-in-law, Naomi, was left a widow. Her two sons soon followed their father in death, leaving two Moabite women as their widows. According to the laws of Moses, the next male in the line of succession is to marry the widow and have children by her. These children would then continue the dead man's legacy. Now, Naomi was middle-aged and thus beyond childbearing age, and with all her sons gone, was unable to provide for her two daughters-in-law. She gave both of them leave to return to their families for safety. But Ruth, fearing for Naomi, decided to stay with her as she returned to her homeland in the vicinity of Bethlehem. Her words to her mother-in-law live on as examples of devotion and chesed. Chesed is a Hebrew word meaning loving kindness. The people of Moab, of whom Ruth was one, were a Semitic people distantly related to the Israelites through Abraham and Lot, but they were not worshippers of the single God of Israel as Naomi. However, in response to Naomi's entreaty to return to her people, Ruth responded, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well." With that, they returned to Israel with nothing of their own but the clothes on their backs. Ruth set about gleaning from the fields, falling behind the workers to reap what was left behind. As it happened, she came upon the field of a man named Boaz, remember him, who turned out to be a relative of Naomi's late husband. Boaz, also exhibiting chesed, forbade any of his workers to bother Ruth as she worked from sunup to sundown. When Naomi heard of this, she prompted Ruth to approach Boaz and seek marriage in order to have a child who would inherit the land Naomi's late husband owned. As the story goes, Ruth and Boaz did marry and had a son named Obed, who would become the father of Jesse, the father of David, the great king of Israel. So Ruth, a Moabite and a foreigner, became the great-grandmother of kings. Long before the story of Ruth, there is a story of the patriarch Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar. This goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 38. Tamar was a Canaanite who married one of Judah's sons. Their son was wicked and soon died after marrying Tamar. Judah's second son took Tamar as his wife according to the laws of God in order to continue the first son's family. However, that second son, knowing that any offspring he had with Tamar would not be his, refused to have children by Tamar. This was evil in the eyes of God, and he also died. That left Judah's youngest son, who was too young to be married at that time. Judah then sent Tamar back to her people to wait until the youngest son was old enough to marry. In the ensuing years, Judah forgot his promise to Tamar. Then one day, Judah went into town on an errand. At the city gate, he was approached by a woman dressed up as a prostitute. He then had his way with her, and there were soon born twin boys. That prostitute was, of course, Tamar, who no longer wanted to wait for Judah to keep his promise, and had disguised herself to trick him. Judah's family line was thus saved for future generations. Boaz, the man who married Ruth, was descended from the illicit union between Judah and his Canaanite daughter-in-law. Ruth, along with Tamar and Rahab, were given an everlasting name as the mothers of the Messianic kings. Matthew's gospel begins with the genealogy of the Jewish nation, from Abraham to Jesus. All but 5 of the names were men. Of the 5 women listed in the genealogy, 3 could be called unworthy by human laws and standards: Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth. The very fact that the 3 unworthy women, 2 foreigners and 1 prostitute, as well as a foreigner, became mothers of kings of Israel emphasizes the grace of God that is offered before any human actions or worthiness. God chooses those who seem unqualified by human standards of judgment to accomplish his purposes in the world. That's it for today. Tune in again for another daily devotional.